So it is Thursday, and you know what that means. After being with you for a week and a half, I know what that means. It's Rhetoric Thursday. Can you explain what that is and what you guys have on your heart for today?
Yeah, Rhetoric is basically a series of lessons we're equipping you all to do, not only giving a reason for the hope that is within you, but also to equip you in doing that effectively. Rhetoric is referring to communication or public speaking, and of course, doing so properly. We've gone through topics like effective listening and the sort of topics to pounce on when you are talking to or at somebody and knowing the difference. And of course, the sort of mistakes that we or others, but more specifically we, can make when getting our thoughts together and how to avoid them. Oftentimes, and as the topic is going to be today, it's simple mistakes, oftentimes just getting things in the wrong order in the way that we present them, and misunderstandings ensuing. And of course, since we have two separate brains and any two or more people speaking, we want to make sure that those are in a line as much as possible when communication is taking place. So in Rhetoric today, we're going to be discussing what's called the no true Scotsman fallacy. The mistake that people make in saying, and this would be an example of it, that no true fill in the blank would do that or feel this way. It would be demonizing someone or alienating someone from relevance on the basis of them not being good enough or not fitting a definition, which we're explaining here today, they haven't actually defined. So, when it comes to the no true Scotsman fallacy, of course, at face value, it sounds strange, but it's a lot easier to make than most people realize, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So that obscure sounding name that Sean just gave you, it actually comes from a little bit of an anecdote that people use to describe this fallacy, because as you've noticed when if you've been going through the fallacies with me and Sean, a lot of them have a lot of obscure Latin names. So a couple of these, they just, instead of using the obscure Latin name, they use a more easy to understand kind of limerick that helps you understand what the fallacy actually is. So the anecdote in this case goes like this. Angus declares that Scotsmen do not put sugar on their porridge, to which Lachlan points out that he is a Scotsman and he puts sugar on his porridge. Furious, like a true Scot, Angus yells that no true Scotsman sugars his porridge. So this is where you make a wide generality about something, and then someone gives you a counterpoint, and you ignore it by saying, as Sean did, well, no true person would do this. So the reason why I brought this one up this week is because, and this has been going on for years, me and Sean talk a lot about a guy named Walt Heyer on the show. Someone who, do you have his book on the
it's
table?
in our dresser over there.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. But Walt Heyer's a guy who actually was convinced that he was trans female. So he was a male. He was convinced that he actually was a female. He went through the surgeries, became a female, and eventually he actually detransitioned, became a male again. And there's actually increasing amounts of people that have gone through the transition process and have been convinced that they did the wrong thing and they've had to go back. Now, what's happened a lot more recently, especially with the topic of starting to administer transitioning drugs, so this is the book, that's the camera.
We're getting it.
So since people have started to increasingly give transitioning drugs to minors, people who are under the age of 18, not only using various drugs to increase hormones, to give testosterone to young girls, and to give estrogen to young boys, but also performing surgeries like double mastectomies, cutting off the healthy breasts of young girls, things like that. The topic of detransitioning is becoming a little bit more embroiled. You could say it's becoming a little bit more heated. And because of that heat that's coming on, people who have detransitioned are becoming lightning rods of controversy, and they're being attacked by people who are believers in the gender ideology, that men can become women and women can become men. Now, the reason why they're becoming lightning rods is because the main pole of their argumentation of why can't you just wait when it comes to a minor who wants to transition? Why can't you wait until they're past the age of 18? You wouldn't give a minor a tattoo. You wouldn't let them permanently alter their body in that way. Why would you allow a 15-year-old to permanently alter their body with these types of drugs? The main argumentations that have been given is that the drugs that are being given are completely reversible. They do no long-term damage whatsoever. And if these kids don't do these things, then they will commit suicide, is put in that either or category. So this week,
instead of the transgender being someone who struggles with gender dysmorphia rather, it's assuming, like with the porridge, a Scotsman is someone who doesn't put this in their porridge.
That's right.
That's the assumption that a true transgender is caricatured to be someone who, if they didn't reassign their gender, would commit suicide.
That's right. And they would never regret it. And so if someone regrets it, well, you weren't a true transgender, obviously.
Which, how you come up with medical verification for that.
Which still is quite ridiculous. So a video is going viral this week. A young girl was convinced to be put on testosterone at the age of 15. She did 5 years of it, and it ended up thinning out her hairline. She has to shave her head now. It permanently dropped her voice to the place where she sounds like a 13-year-old going through puberty, a 13-year-old male going through puberty, and she's permanently stuck like that for the rest of her life. And she basically was just talking about how much she regretted doing this to her body and how she recognizes that she's, as she put it in her quotations, past the point of no return, that she can never go back to the body that she had. And again, this throws into sharp contrast the two blatant proponents that we've gone over before, that they're reversible and that if you don't do it, that someone is more likely to commit suicide. Here's someone who's showing that the drugs are not reversible, and she's actually more depressed now after undergoing these drugs than she was before taking them. So you have a counterexample. And instead of saying, well, you know, I guess some people see it this way and some people see it the other way, and maybe it works for some and maybe it doesn't work for others, they instead have to say, no, she's not a true transgender. And therefore she's being openly attacked, mocked, and ridiculed. So if you were to go onto this young girl's video today, you would see pages of just people blatantly calling her out, making fun of her, mocking her, encouraging her to kill herself, things like that, which is not great. Now, this exists in multiple areas and venues of life. Actually, while we were talking, I did think of a biblical example. So
I always want to make sure we have one.
Yeah, so in the Bible, there is a book called Proverbs, and Proverbs deals with practical everyday wisdom. It's not really designed to be a theological book, meaning that we're not going to the book of Proverbs to understand great theological truths. We're instead going to the book of the Proverbs, like I said, to go through practical daily wisdom and how to interact with things that are going on every day. One of the big ones is parenting. Now, there are multiple proverbs that talk about parenting, and a lot of them are in these kind of strong statements. For instance, a favorite is, train up a child in a way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. So, people looking at that proverb, if a child goes wrong, and you're going to take that proverb seriously, you're going to take it to its logical conclusion, well, then what do you have to conclude? You didn't raise your kid in the way he should have gone, right? So any rebellious child is the fault of the parent. Now, once again, when you go through the book of Proverbs, it actually is not intending to make universal statements that can never be falsified. What it's trying to teach us is the general rule that we're supposed to abide by in order to be conformed to God's wisdom. So I'll give you another example. I could say, going through various Proverbs, that if you work hard, you dedicate yourself to your craft, and you work on being competent in what you're doing, you will be successful and you will make money. That's a general rule. Are there exceptions to the rule? Yes, there are people that work really hard, they become very competent, and the bottom gets dropped out from underneath them, and it's to no fault of their own, right? So that can happen. Also, there are very incompetent people who become very successful and wealthy. Once again, the Proverbs are not designed to give us generalized rules like the no true Scotsman fallacy. They are instead trying to give us overarching standards of behavior that help us conform to God's wisdom. And because of that, there will be, and we're in a fallen world, God is present, but he is also distant. There will always be exceptions to the rules that God has set up within his good creation. There are also ones in counseling, I hear people question oftentimes the salvation of fellow believers. Well, you know, no true Christian would listen to music like that.
Yeah.
Well, no true Christian would ever stumble or fall in that particular way, right? Like when Ravi Zacharias, the issues concerning his life came out, people say, well, no true Christian would behave like that. Well, actually, yeah, some
lot
true
of
Christians
Christians
would behave that way. It doesn't mean that it's Christ-like behavior.
And that's the key, is a proper definition of what a true Christian, a true Scotsman, a true whatever is. If you overgeneralize it and then hyper-define it, that's the fallacy.
Absolutely. And I'll just give one more, and then we'll talk about how to avoid this, because it is easy to avoid. It's easy to fall into, but it's also easy to avoid. And then also how to address it when someone does it to you. I have noticed in Christian apologetics sometimes, I've heard people misappropriate various arguments for the existence of God. The big one would be the moral argument. So I have heard Christians say, well, you can't be an atheist and be moral.
No, that's not the
Which is not the moral argument, right? The moral argument is you have no philosophical grounding for objective morality outside of God. It doesn't suggest that you can't be moral and be an atheist. And so when someone says, well, here's an atheist who's moral, well, they're not a true atheist then. They're not living in their atheism correctly.
Because the assumption is an atheist in this fallacy is defined as someone who's immoral.
Right.
Is that a proper definition of an atheist?
No.
Even we would say no.
No, absolutely. So, Sean, how do you avoid making this mistake, and how do you address it when it's made towards you?
No words. In more than 2 words, it is define your terms properly. And the best way to do this is either to ask questions. Maybe if the audience that you're speaking with is present and can represent themselves, you can clarify those terms. But say if you're speaking for yourself as a Christian, the no true Christian fallacy is broken once you can properly define what a Christian is. And in 1 Corinthians 11 and verse 1, I think we're given the most straightforward example in history. Paul, speaking to the church in Corinth, says, imitate me as I imitate Christ. I am only an example to you insofar as my character is modeling Christ. Now note, did Christ watch R-rated movies? Well, he didn't watch any movies. So the question is an application of heart, not in conduct. Is the character of Christ someone who never sinned? Yes, but then you have to make sure you're specific in saying, so we're supposed to be sinless, and if you sin, you're not Christ-like. That would be a bad definition. Otherwise, no one could be Christian. And that's when the definition coming from Christ himself said, this is how you will know that you are my disciples, that you have love for one another, the kind of love that he modeled for us, that we share common truth statements like the non-negotiables that we discuss and what makes or breaks you as a Christian. These are the sort of things you have to take into consideration. And notice, you have to think about this a little bit.
Yeah.
What makes a true Christian? What makes a true gender dysmorphic struggle person, whatever? What makes something what it is? And once that's properly defined, then you can say, not that's not how a true Christian would act. You'd say, is that a way a true Christian would act? Yeah. 2 words, but what a difference it makes in not only avoiding assumptions, but also misrepresentations.
And like a lot of these fallacies, it takes a lot of humility to be able to. So if you make this fallacy, which is easy, it's easy to overgeneralize, it's easy to miscategorize things. When you're called out on it, it takes a lot of humility to say, you're right. That was an overgeneralization, or I was hasty with my words, I wasn't very clear, I'm sorry. Let me make myself more clear in the way that I'm communicating, right? That takes a lot of humility. Now, if you're dealing with someone in an argument, right, a debate, a discussion about a issue, whether it's on Christianity or whatnot, and they commit this fallacy, it's going to be very difficult to call them out on it because they've already doubled down. You've already given a counterexample, and they've already said, no true Christian would ever do this. Well, then you could point out to them, as you said, Sean, you could follow up and say, well, what do you mean by a Christian? When you say no true Christian would do this, please define your terms. What is a Christian in your estimation? Something like that. You can try to ask in a soft, gentle way, right? A gentle answer turns away wrath. You could try in a gentle way to try to get the person to categorize themselves correctly so you can carry on the conversation. But you're already on shaky grounds when someone doubles down on a fallacy. So the odds of you being able to turn it around are low. That doesn't mean they're non-existent, but it means that they are low. And that means, as we've talked about before, know when to quit, right? Know when a argument is just not going to go anywhere, or the person is not open to dialoguing with you in truth.
Yeah. So make sure that those are understood, not only what you're talking about, but a willingness to revisit that topic if it's missed. Otherwise, it doesn't make for good communication. That's what we want to avoid, and good communication is what we want to pursue. So what would be a good example of the true Scotsman? Well, imitate me as I imitate Christ. Am I someone who's being a model and a representation of Jesus Christ? And if someone says, well, no Christian would do that, that is a valid statement. Would Jesus have done that? And the answer is no. Then you can say, oh, I'm at fault, or they're at fault. But understand as well, if you reverse the argument, instead of defining what it means to be a Christian, arguing from an illustration, the true Christian, rather than a definition, that's when manipulation or mistakes happen. And we want to make sure we'll be addressing more about attributing motive here next week. But the key is just that. Know what something is, and then you can identify what it isn't in life. That's the simplest way to put it.
Great. Good stuff. Thank you. We hope that helps you out, helps to equip you.